chatting you, and just leave me to talk a little bit about Skiffle. Skiffle! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm here to talk to you about the wonder of Skiffle. Skiffle is, well, it's a lot of things. It's a lot of things. It's the original kind of teenagers' music after the first bunch of teenagers appeared in the years after the Second World War. It's the music that introduces the guitar into British popular music. And it's the music that is the nursery for the invasion of the British beat groups into the American charts in the wake of the Beatles in 1963. All of those bands you ever heard of that went to America, the Rolling Stones, Herman's Hermits, all of them started out playing skiffle. David Bowie was in a skiffle band, Elton John was in a skiffle band, even one of the guys from ABBA was in a skiffle band. In fact, I think I can probably say that my generation, who was born during the skiffle craze, I was born in 1957, we were probably the first, when punk come along, the first generation who wasn't in skiffle bands when we were young. So that's what we're going to be talking about today for a bit. I'm going to illustrate with a bit of singing, some of the music itself, but I'm really going to tell you the story of the first British teenagers. Now, anyone who knows a little bit about skiffle will know that it starts with Lonnie Donegan and the Rock Island Line. Lonnie Donegan begins the Rock Island Line by telling a story. He says, "Now this is the story of the Rock Island Line. The Rock Island Line goes down to New Orleans. And outside New Orleans, there's a big toll gate. And you have to come through that toll gate on your train. Depending on what you have in that train, you have to pay the man some money. Except, the Rock Island Line doesn't go to New Orleans. And there aren't any toll booths on the American railways." Lonnie Donegan doesn't know what he's talking about. And the reason he doesn't know what he's talking about is because he's learned this song from a record. And the record that he's learned this song from is a live record recorded in 1946 by an African-American singer called Leadbelly, Huddy Ledbetter. Now, Leadbelly was an amazing guy. He was a very inspirational guy. He was, as Bob Dylan had Woody Guthrie as his hero, Woody Guthrie's hero was Leadbelly. And Leadbelly was born in the 1880s. But before that, the Rock Island Line was born in 1854 when they built a railroad from Chicago to a place called Rock Island, which is in Illinois. And the significance of Rock Island is that it's the first place that they built a bridge across the Mississippi River. So it was an absolutely crucial place in the expansion of the United States of America. Because once they crossed the Mississippi, then they could build railways all the way to the Rocky Mountains. And the significance of the railroad to the development of a country is incredible. In a small country like our own, it wasn't such a big deal, but in a vast country like the United States of America, until the invention of the railroad, you could only build a town if it was on a river in the interior, because you simply couldn't get the building materials you needed into the interior. So all of the cities were up the Mississippi, they were up the Ohio River. The only way you could get into the United States of America really was through the rivers. And if you know anything about the geography of the rivers, you'll know that most of the rivers go north-south, the Mississippi being the biggest. So for the first 200 years of the United States of America, the Mississippi was a great barrier that stopped people from expanding in a large way. You know, obviously they could go across the Mississippi, but they couldn't really expand. When the railroad came in the 1860s and built right across the United States, right across to the Pacific, suddenly you could do in 5 days what it would take you 5 or 6 weeks to do in a wagon train. I would argue that the railroad is the most transformative technology that humans ever invented. Because before the railway came, you could not go faster than a horse could gallop or a ship could sail. After the railways, yeah, you could go faster in a car, but you could still do the things the railways do. You could go in an airplane, but you're still basically doing the same thing the railway could do. What the railway did It's kind of like what Amazon did for our generation. For people in the middle of the United States of America, when the railway come, all of a sudden, you could... Is it my nose that's feeding back like that, mate? Maybe you could do something about it. Well, that's it, yeah, that's what I was hoping you could do. When the railroad come, not only could you order something from New York and a week later it might turn up, you could get on a damn train and go to New York. And that transformed the lives of people. Same in this country, it was exactly the same. I don't think there's ever been a more transformative technology than the steam train. It changes everything. It changes everything. And as a consequence of that, the Americans, loads and loads of people wrote songs about the railroad. The railroad was the place of dreams. It was the way of getting out of, you know, where you lived and getting to the big city. The great migrations that happened in the United States of America, particularly of African Americans from the South at the end of slavery to the North, to Chicago, to Detroit, to New York, to Boston, on the railroad. So many great railroad songs were written. And among those songs was a song called The Rock Island Line. Now, the Rock Island Line was originally written as a kind of advertising jingle for the Rock Island Railroad. The railroad would send often African-American vocal groups to an event like this, you know, it's kind of like a county fair or you know, a fete or whatever, you know, a local open-air event, and they would perform their songs saying, buy your ticket on the Rock Island Line, travel safely on the Rock Island Line, come to, you know, that's... They kind of wrote their own songs, and in Little Rock, Arkansas, the guys who worked in the engineer shed had their own quartet, and they wrote this song, "Buy Your Ticket on the Rock Island Line," and it was an advertising jingle. Now, fast forward a couple of 10 years, and Leadbelly, that guy we were talking about, that great singer-songwriter, he's in prison. He's in prison singing songs. That's what he does. He's a songster. By being a songster, that means that he sings whatever the songs are popular of the day. You know, he didn't just sing blues songs. The blues, in many ways... Is it me or is it you? It's me? Oh, I thought it was me. I'm sagging. I've been out with 4 grandchildren for 5 hours this afternoon. I'm nearly... Should never have gone on that bastard cakewalk thing, I tell you. That's really killed me. Anyway, apart from that, I wish I had their energy, I tell you. Yeah, Leadbelly, he's in prison. He's killed a man, and he's serving time in prison. But he's that kind of guy who entertains people. He's an amazing songwriter who also has a great memory for songs. And one time, some people come to the prison collecting songs, and they find Leadbelly, and they make some incredible recordings of him. So when his time in prison comes to an end, these people come back to find him, and they take him out on the road with them, because they continue recording songs in prisons because they're trying to find old folk songs, these the sort of white New York song collectors. And Leadbelly does something that they can't do. He goes into the prison the night before among the predominantly African-American inmates, and he says to them, these are the kind of songs we want to hear. Have you got any songs like this? Have you got any? So consequently, he's an incredible asset to the Lomax, Mr. Lomax and his son. A real incredible asset. And also, he lugs all the gear as well. You know, he's kind of like, he does the driving. He's kind of doing everything for the Lomaxes. And one day they come to a prison in Arkansas, and they're recording songs. And one of the songs that they record is this song called The Rock Island Line. And the Rock Island Line has been transformed since it was originally written. It's gone into sort of folk music. And the people in the prison sing Rock Island Line as a kind of spiritual song to get them out of prison again, as prison people often do. And Leadbelly, being a smart cookie, only needs to hear a song once to be able to remember and to play it. That's his great, great skill. He's an amazing memory guy. So he takes this Rock Island Line song and he starts performing it. And because he's worked with musicologists, the audiences that come to see him, they're not just coming to hear a song, but they want to know what is this song used for? Because some of the songs that Lead Belly sang were work songs that he'd sung in the fields when he was a child on a plantation. Songs that he'd learned from his parents and grandparents. So he would tell the musicologists who came to see him, because he wasn't doing gigs and festivals like I do, that didn't exist. He was playing to academics. So he would tell them the story of the song and how it was used. But if he found a song, and he found a really strong, he didn't have a story for it, he thought he'd better make up a story so these guys don't fire him. So with Rock Island Line, he starts off talking about when he first records it. He records it about half a dozen times. He first records it, he talks about it being a wood cutting song. It's not a wood, you couldn't cut the wood quick enough to Rock Island Line. He's saying that because they recorded it at the prison by the wood pile. And some of the songs were wood cutting songs, and he's thinking, after a while he twigs this doesn't work, so he then changes the story to this railroad story. And in Lead Belly's story, what happens is, it's not a toll gate that the train driver has to go into, it's a siding. Because in the song, the guy who's trying to get through the toll gate, he says he's got livestock on board. I got pigs, I got horses, I got all livestock, I got all livestock. And the guy in Lonnie Donegan's song, the guy says to him, well, you can go through, you don't need to pay any money. Now in Lead Belly's song, the guy says that, but what he means is, you don't have to go in a siding, because in the old days in the American railroads, freight trains had to get out of the way of passenger trains. So they would go in a siding while the passenger train went through, the express went through. But if you had livestock on board, for animal welfare reasons, you could go straight through. So Lead Belly, when he tells the story, he's talking about a siding. He says this guy has to go in the hole. Lonnie Donegan's probably never seen an American railroad. He's definitely never seen Lead Belly. So he's just, and nobody else knows any better, because it's not, these are very old recordings, and Lead Belly can't really make sense of it exactly every time he tells the story differently. So it's a kind of hard thing to get hold of. But that's what he's talking about. He's talking about going in the hole, going in a siding. But Donegan, he invents this whole thing about a toll booth. And by doing that, he kind of watermarks his version of the song. So if you ever hear anyone singing Rock Island Line, they talk about a toll booth, they learned that song from Lonnie Donegan. They didn't learn it from Lead Belly. And the weird thing about this is, when Johnny Cash recorded his first album in 1956, the first track is Rock Island Line. And Johnny Cash talks about a toll booth. He didn't learn it from Lead Belly. He learned it from Lonnie Donegan, which is kind of really weird in a Coles to Newcastle way, isn't it? Because Lonnie Donegan had a hit in America with Rock Island Line in 1956. He went on the Ed Sullivan show, the same show the Beatles went on, and acted a skit with Ed Sullivan and Ronald Reagan, who at the time was an actor. So yeah, in this kind of strange world, Rock Island Line has become a kind of key song. Now, one of the problems with Rock Island Line is I can never remember all the words or the order in which the rap goes. So purists among you may be appalled, but I'm going to get as near as I can to what Donegan did. He did something like this. Now, this is the story of the Rock Island Line. The Rock Island Line goes down to New Orleans. And if you want to go down there, you have to go through a toll booth. And here we see a train coming, and the toll booth man, the driver shouts down to him, I got pigs, I got horses, I got cows, I got sheep, I got chihuahuas, I got miniature Pomeranians, I got all livestock, I got all livestock, I got all livestock. And the train guy says, oh, that's okay, you can go through. So the train goes through, and now he's picking up a bit of speed now. And the guy calls back to him, the train driver calls back to him, I fooled you, I followed you. I got pig iron, I got pig iron, I got all pig iron. Well, the Rock Island Line, mighty good, whoa. Rock Island Line is the road to ride. Rock Island Line, mighty good road. If you wanna ride it, gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line. I may be right, I may be wrong. You're gonna miss me when I'm gone. Well, the Rock Island Line is a mighty good road. Rock Island Line is a road to ride. Rock Island Line, mighty good road. If you wanna ride it, gotta ride it like you flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line. A, B, C, W, X, Y, Z. Cat's in the cupboard, but he can't see me. Well, obviously he's in the cupboard, he can't see me. What's nonsense? The whole the Rock Island Line is a mighty good road. Rock Island Line is a road to ride. Rock Island Line, mighty good road. If you wanna ride it, gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line. Jesus died to save our sins. Oh, mighty gonna see him again. Well, the Rock Island Line is a mighty good road. Rock Island Line is a road to ride. Rock Island Line, mighty good road. If you wanna ride it, gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line. Rock Island Line is a road to ride. Rock Island Line is a road. Rock Island Line, mighty good road. If you wanna ride it, gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line. Thank you. So if you know anything about the prehistory of British pop, you'll know that it all begins with Rock Island Line. Like it's a singularity, like it just suddenly appears out of nowhere, like it's magicked up. Of course, that's totally untrue. Nothing just appears. Rock Island Line emerges from a vibrant scene among post-war young people, and it comes through a form of music we now refer to as trad jazz. Now, I know when you think about trad jazz, you think of Acapulco and you know, Kenny Jazz and his ball band and all those kind of people. But I have to tell you, back in the 40s, late 40s and early 50s, trad jazz was the hippest music in the UK by far. And when I'm talking about trad jazz, I mean music that was played in New Orleans from about 1900 to about 1915. Now, this was a special kind of jazz music. It was revolutionary music at the time, played by African Americans, and it was, the key thing about trad jazz is there's no soloists. Everybody plays together. Trad jazz ends in 1915 because a guy named Louis Armstrong emerges who starts playing these amazing solos. Louis Armstrong's like the Eric Clapton, the Jimi Hendrix really, the Jimi Hendrix of trad jazz, and everything, of jazz rather, and it just changes everything. And it becomes about virtuosity, whereas trad jazz is all about people playing together. It's a collective endeavour. And for some reason, hip young people in the UK in the years after the Second World War were really, really blown away by trad jazz. Now, you got to remember that rationing of food and petrol doesn't end in the UK until 1954. In fact, the rationing after the Second World War was sometimes worse than it was during the war, because the British also had to feed people in Germany who weren't able to make their own food. So, for instance, bread was rationed after the war. It was never rationed during the war, but it was rationed after the war. So these were pretty tough times, pretty harsh times. If you were born in 1940, like John Lennon was, let's say, you weren't able to go into a sweet shop and buy what you wanted until you were 14 years old. And bear in mind, people left school at 15 and went to work. So this is a generation that grew up not really be able to enjoy a childhood, you know. And so, consequently, they were looking for something to define themselves as different from their parents, because these kids had nothing but war, bloody war, and rationing, boring. Only one radio station, the BBC, telly, not many people can see it, you know, a few people have got it. Things are pretty dull. So they glom on, the hipsters, they glom on to trad jazz. Now trad jazz happens because mainstream jazz has gone big band. It's gone Frank Sinatra, it's gone Bing Crosby. It's lost its earthiness, it's also lost its African American roots. And there's two ways of responding to that. You either invent new music, which is what bebop was, African American musicians in New York trying to make new music, or you go back to basics, which is what the trad jazzers did, and back to New Orleans before Louis Armstrong. And if you're old enough to remember punk rock, it's like the trad jazz guys are like the Ramones going back to garage rock to get away from the overblown prog rock. The mainstream jazz is like prog rock, you know, it's massive jazz orchestras and Count Basie and, you know, singers in taffeta frocks and bow ties and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So they're kind of radical, it's like punk rock. But if you want to play this music in the UK, the only way to find out how to play it is to listen to the records from that period. There's no way, you can't, obviously you can't go online, but you can't buy a book that teaches you how to play music. I mean, Lonnie Donegan learned to play the banjo by sitting on the edge of the stage and watching a guy play banjo up close. I mean, closer, almost this close. So much so that the guys used to ask him to sit a bit further back because they're watching what they're doing with their fingers. That's how they learned. And they also learned to play by listening to the original recordings made in the 1920s, most of them made in the 1920s, some in the 30s, the 1920s. Now, recording in America in the 1920s was pretty basic. There was generally one microphone and everybody had to play hard to be heard. So the original recordings, they're not playing how they would play if they were playing in a venue this size, where they would play with some timbre, where they would play with some you know, light and shade. They're blowing like Billy-O to get on the record. So as a consequence, these records have incredible energy. But if 20 years later, 30 years later, you're in the UK listening to these records, trying to work out how to play this music, you're just going to blow as hard as you can. Of course you are. It'd be like listening to the Ramones, you know, or some grunge rock band where the lyrics are growled. You're going to growl, you know, you're going to try and do what's on the record. So consequently, these bands, these trad jazz bands who were learning, they just blew really, really hard. And as a result, after about 30 minutes, their lips were so numb, they couldn't play anymore. They just couldn't play. So they had to have a break. And in the break, they had to think of something to do. So what they did to not lose their audience was that they put down their brass instruments and their reed instruments, and the guy playing the banjo come to the front of the stage, picked up a guitar, and they played Lead Belly songs. And this, they called this the breakdown session, where they would break it down, because they weren't only playing music for people to dance to, they were also trying to educate people about African American roots music. They wanted people to appreciate this music to the level that they appreciated it. And as I say, you couldn't find out about this music on the radio. You know, the trad jazz guys, they would go to a thing called a record recital. And they could fill the Wigmore Hall in London, which is 1,200 people. They could sell that out, and that would just be one guy with an amazing record collection who was an expert on jazz records. And people like the name Skiffle because it has that sort of scraping sound that you get with a washboard, that kind of skiffly sound, you know. And so consequently the music press pick up on this, and these skiffle sessions become really popular. Young people are not allowed to go dancing in ballrooms. Young people who want to jive are not allowed to jive in ballrooms. Ballroom dancing in the 50s was the mass dancing. I mean, you know, you could fill huge ballrooms with people dancing to big bands. And the thing about ballroom dancing is it's processional. It kind of moves slowly in a great big circle, like a kind of you know, a solar system. You know, it moves. They move around. Whereas if you're jiving on the spot. So if you're jiving while everyone else is ballroom dancing, you're going to cause a traffic jam. So consequently, jiving was banned from ballrooms in Britain, along with wearing brothel creepers. Yeah, they will put signs up. No brothel creepers, no drapes, no jiving. So where could these kids go? Well, it just happens that these trad jazz bands were very often playing in the function room in a pub. So consequently, they had a license to sell drinks to 15-year-olds. You could go, so these kids start turning up and jiving during the skiffle session, because the skiffle songs are all kind of, you know, sort of free chord, kind of almost type rock and roll type songs, like this one. I can't remember the words. It's always the words with these songs. Me and my lady went to town, sail away, lady, sail away. Went to buy a brand new bound. Sail away, lady, sail away. Don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh. But she tried the red. She sail away. She'll take both of these dresses, she said. Sail away, lady, sail away. Don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh. She put them on, she looked a treat. Sail away, lady, sail away. She found another man to meet. Sail away, lady, sail away. Don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh, don't you rock me, daddy, oh. I'm going home to fill my trunk. Sail away, lady, sail away. I'll find a bar and get me drunk. Sail away, lady, sail away. Don't you rock me, daddy, oh, 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 don't you rock me, daddy, don't you rock me, daddy, oh. Whoa, don't you rock me, daddy-o. And a bit. Oh. As I was saying, Ken Collier's not the easiest bloke to work with. He was a bit of a... he kind of was such a purist about New Orleans jazz that when the band went out of London and people who didn't know anything about New Orleans jazz wanted a waltz or the latest pop song, he wouldn't play it. So consequently they were having a bit of trouble getting bookings outside of London because there wasn't this trad jazz scene. And eventually, as I say, Lonnie Donegan, who was a bit of a wind-up merchant, Collier eventually decided he had enough of him. So he went to Chris Barber, the trombone player, and he said, I'm going to have to fire Lonnie. I just can't stand him, he's impossible to work with. And Barber said, yeah, nobody can stand working with Lonnie. Everybody knows he's hard to work with, but this band is a collective, and we have to take these decisions collectively. So Barber called a meeting, they took a vote, and they sacked Ken Collier. There you go. That's what they call solidarity. They decided to sack Collier. They threw Collier out, and so now it's the Chris Barber Jazz Band. And they're signed up in 1954 to make one of the first trad jazz records by British bands in July 1954. Now, a month before they record this record, rationing comes to an end. So finally, it's possible to go out and buy whatever sweets you want, make whatever cakes you want. It's almost like the war, finally, they're out the other end of the war. New Queen, people got TVs, things are starting to look up. So they go and record this album for Decca, and it transpires that Barber doesn't have enough new songs to put on this record that they can play. And the producer of the record is absolutely appalled because this record is costing £30 to make. And they've only got 7 tracks. He's going to lose his job. So Donegan says, well, why don't we record some of the Skiffle songs? They go to the pub, they come back, and by this time, half the band had gone home. So it's just Chris Barber, Lonnie Donegan, and they ring a woman called Beryl Brydon, and she comes down with a washboard, and Lonnie Donegan, Chris Barber on bass, and Beryl Brydon, they record a few Leadbelly songs, and then they put the album comes out in 1955, 10-inch, New Orleans Joys. It does pretty well, it's pretty good. I mean, it allows the Chris Barber band to tour the UK to great reviews. But something else is going on. What happens in 1955 is the first generation of proper teenagers leave school. And they're getting jobs, particularly the young women, are getting jobs in factories where their mothers worked in factories during the war, and they're getting paid reasonable wages. And the only things they want to spend their money on are makeup and records. So all of a sudden there's this kind of new scene that nobody's really spotted before, because previous to this you had adults and you had children. The BBC made radio programmes for adults and they made radio programmes for children. There was no defined teenage, you know. If you wanted to when you left school, you either got conscripted into the army. Remember, young men are still being conscripted at this time, or you went and worked with your dad, got an apprenticeship and worked with your dad. There was no kind of visible teenage thing. But what happens is these young women appear, and they're really interested in finding their own social space. There's no place for them to get together and talk about the things they want to talk about. They can't go in a pub on their own. That's not acceptable. They don't want to go to the local Lions Tea Bar. They might see their auntie there. They don't want to go to the milk bars because that's where all the little kids are. So they start going to the newly opened cappuccino bars, where you can sit in a bar, buy a coffee and stay there till 11 o'clock at night, because in Soho they open really, really late. So these young women start to frequent these cappuccino bars. And these are a special kind of young women as well, because rather than taking their cues from America, the fashions from America, which at the time would be Marilyn Monroe type fashions, they are taking their fashions from Milan and from Paris. So think more Jean Seberg, short haircuts, kind of mannish kind of clothes, cigarette holders and stuff like this, very sophisticated. So these young women are finding for the first time their own social space in these coffee bars, and they're making it their own. It's a real important aspect of this Skiffle thing, because it's their emergence that gives Skiffle somewhere to happen. Without them, it would have been just a lot of spotty schoolboys playing Leadbelly songs in school gyms. It's the young women who've got money to spend. The first magazine for teenage girls, Mirabelle, comes out in 1956. Suddenly, they're visible. Marketing finds them. Records start coming for them. And in late 1955, the first kind of, in 1955, commercial television starts up. So the BBC has a monopoly on everything you could hear. You could only hear music on the BBC radio and watch their television programmes. In 1955, ITV begins in London and Manchester. And they have a different set of rules from the BBC. They don't have to be public service broadcasting. They can broadcast whatever they like. So while the BBC are doing sort of like programmes of, that would improve your education, ITV are doing wrestling. They're putting on football. They're importing American TV programmes. I Love Lucy appears on ITV. A lot of cowboy programmes come, both for children and for adults. And in the 1950s, cowboys very often sang. They had a guitar. If you look at the old 1950s cowboy movies, there's almost always a guy with a guitar there playing a song. And so cowboys became one of the people that, if you listen to the radio in the UK, you could hear playing a guitar, because no British singers played guitar. If you had a British singer in the charts, they were almost always a crooner. They were playing with a big band. But
if someone like a singing cowboy would play on the radio, or a blues guy, if a blues singer come over, you might hear them on the radio. Big Bill Brunsey would play guitar. You might hear him on the radio on an obscure late night program, or you might hear someone from the Windrush generation playing calypso, because when the Windrush generation come in 1948, they were identified in British culture with calypso. Although calypso only comes from Trinidad and Tobago, it became the identifier for the whole of the Windrush generation. And songs like Cricket, Lovely Cricket, London is the Place for Me, these were heard by people on the radio all the time as the BBC tried to integrate those people. So they're the people you would hear playing a guitar on the radio. Outsiders, cowboys, bluesmen, calypsonians. You would never hear a British person playing a guitar, but guitars are an exotic instrument. So what happens in 1955 is a record from America comes in that people start hearing on Radio Luxembourg, and the song is called Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets. And this is a completely revolutionary type of music. This is the very, very beginnings of rock and roll. And it just goes gangbusters in the charts. Now, at the time, record singles were released around dance crazes. So one year there will be a craze. The year before Rock Around the Clock, it was Mambo. Everybody had a record called something Mambo. The big dance bands all played a Mambo. Mambo was that year's record. It looked like during, as this Rock Around the Clock became popular, that the big dance of the night of 1956 would be the rock, whatever that was. It was never clearly defined what the rock was, but it would seem then to marketing men, any song with the word rock in it would sell, because we seem to be part of that craze. So somebody at Decca Records remembered that when Chris Barber recorded his trad jazz album, there's a track on there called Rock Island Line, and it's a guy on a guitar and he sounds like an American. Maybe we could have a punt with this song, Rock Island Line, just see what it does. So in late 1955, 18 months after it's been recorded, Lonnie Donegan's Rock Island Line comes out and just blows everybody away. There's nothing, they've heard nothing like it before. I mean, Rock Island Line is a strange track. It's not only the fact that Lonnie Donegan does half the song as a monologue. Once he starts playing, he gets faster and faster and faster, like a runaway train. If you've been listening to nothing but Nat King Cole and Rosemary Clooney for 30 years, Lonnie Donegan is like the Sex Pistols. It's like incredible, and your parents are gonna hate it, and you're gonna really, really love it. So Donegan appears with this song Rock Island Line and jumps into the charts and kicks off this whole skiffle boom. And in 1956 he tours the UK playing on the variety circuit, because there is no rock club circuit, there is no jazz club circuit. He's playing in variety theatres, mostly the local Empire, so the Hackney Empire, the Chiswick Empire, the Liverpool Empire. He plays a week at the Liverpool Empire, 2 shows a night, a matinee and an evening show. George Harrison goes every night. Paul McCartney goes on the Saturday night. John Lennon, we're not sure if he goes, but a week later he forms his first skiffle band, the Quarrymen. Donegan is just amazing people, blowing people away with this new kind of music. And the thing about Donegan is he doesn't sound like he lives in East London. He sounds like he's an American. And this is the first time that the British kids have been able to hear someone born in their country that sounds like a rock and roller. This is before Tommy Steele. It's kind of... Van Morrison said that, British kids wanted to be Elvis Presley, but you couldn't be Elvis Presley if you were from Belfast. But you could be Lonnie Donegan. And that moment of realisation, I had it myself when I saw The Clash. in 1977. You know, before I was listening to the Rolling Stones and the Who, and I had no idea how to ever get from where I was sitting watching them to up where they were. When I saw the Clash, they were my age. They were playing my music. All of a sudden I understood that it wasn't about waiting for someone to come and ask me to play. It was about going and doing it. It was an incredible epiphany seeing the Clash. So consequently I understand how seeing Lonnie Donegan or hearing Lonnie Donegan on the radio is going to just fire people up. And so what happens is Donegan kind of transcends the whole of the genre of trad jazz and kicks off this skiffle boom. And this goes on 56, 57, 58, and by then it's kind of petered out. And the interesting thing about it is it's almost all schoolboys. It's like a school, a playground craze among schoolboys. There is no skiffle circuit, you know, they're just the very first trad jazz clubs are opening. So they are the 100 Club is a trad jazz club, the Marquee is a trad jazz club, the Cavern in Liverpool is a trad jazz club. But they also will put on skiffle bands. And in 1950, they estimated that they sold around 10,000 acoustic guitars in the UK. In 1957, they sold 250,000 acoustic guitars in the UK. And if you divide that by 10, let's be fair, divide it by 10, then that's how many little skiffle groups there were playing in scout halls, playing in church, the backs of churches, playing in school gyms. Something around 25,000 scraping away playing. And why play skiffle? Well, firstly, when you get one of these, you can actually got physical proof that you're not the same as your old man. You're something different. You're this generation. Look out, old man. I spoke to Pete Townsend when I was writing a book about this. He saw his father played trombone in a big band called the Squadronaires. And that was the kind of music he knew. He went to see the Ken Collier band in the early days. And at the breakdown session, he saw Lonnie Donegan come from the back of the stage, pick up a guitar, come to the front of the stage and take control of the gig. And he said, I knew at that moment that my old man's music was finished and that this was the future. And I had to get a guitar and learn to do that. Well, if you multiply that by 1 million, let's say, of sentient schoolboys, that's how skiffle comes to be. And they're all playing 3-chord lead belly songs, just 3-chord songs. Rock Iron Lion's 3-chord songs. Don't You Rock Me Daddy-O, 3-chord song. They're playing just nothing but 3-chord songs. But they're desperate for somewhere to play. Or the other reason why, apart from being different from your old man, the other reason why you might want to play skiffle is because you can impress your mates if you're good at football. But if you're good at skiffle, you can impress girls. And let's be honest, all of us who do this gig picked up a guitar first because we weren't very good at football. And so, consequently, they're now looking for somewhere to play. Where are the young women? They're in the coffee bars. They're in the coffee bars. And most of those early coffee bars, although they were Italian in their kind of idea, they very often had someone in the corner playing Spanish guitar music, flamenco-esque music, for that kind of like, sort of Mediterranean vibe. So the transition from having one guy playing in the corner to having 5 guys playing skiffle wasn't a big leap. And pretty soon, all over Soho, skiffle clubs are bursting out. They're coming out of the woodwork. Bands are turning up to play. Young women are coming in to stay up all night and drink cappuccino. And Soho is kind of the birthplace of what really is the British music scene. People are desperate to learn this new 3-chord music. And weirdly, their source is the American Embassy in London. Because in the American Embassy in London, in Grosvenor Square, they have a record library there where you can go and borrow recordings made by the Library of Congress. Now, the Library of Congress sent people out in the 1930s to make field recordings of American folk music. That's what the Lomaxes were doing when they recorded Leadbelly. So Leadbelly's recordings are available to you from the American Embassy in London. So that was where they were getting their source material. They were getting these Leadbelly records and other Woody Guthrie records as well, Carter Family records. So it's not just about old blues songs, it's also about country and western songs, Labour songs, all sorts of kind of songs, Woody Guthrie songs. This was recorded by the 219 Skiffle group. Why they were called 219, I don't know. I think probably something to do with the train, I should imagine. It's called Union Maid. It's an old Woody Guthrie song. There once was a... Oh, it's a bit low. It's up here. Let's try it here. There once was a union maid who never was afraid of the gigs and the groups and the company groups and the who made the raid. She went to the union hall when the meeting it was called. She it came around. This is what she'd say. Oh, you can't fool me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't fool me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. This union maid was wise to the girls at the country spies. There's something he says about griefs and gooks that I've never really understood why he says, but she went to stay when the meeting it was called. She showed her card to the National Guard and this is what she'd say. Oh, you can't fool me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't fool me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. Oh, you can't fool me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't fool me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. I'm not sure about that. That's the connection between it. But white American kids don't start playing their guitars until the folk revival, and that doesn't really begin until 59. Skiffle reaches its peak in 57 on the 6th of July when Paul McCartney goes to see the Quarrymen at Wootton Church Fete and meets John Lennon. That's the day when Skiffle reaches its peak, and after that it kind of fades away. Tommy Steele comes in, the record industry take over again, and everything goes pear-shaped for the Skifflers. But when them kids were 15, they've learned these songs. By the time they get to 20, it's 1962, it's 1963, and the Beatles break America. There's already a whole cohort of young British musicians who've been playing for 5 or 6 years and who love American roots music in a way that their white US contemporaries don't. They're not interested in the blues, they're interested in folk music. They're in a folk revival. They're singing Tom Dooley. Whereas those British kids are now the Rolling Stones, they're now the Animals, they're now the Kinks, they're now all of those people. But particularly obviously the Beatles. And that's how Skiffle, by teaching British schoolboys the 3 chords necessary to play Chuck Berry, changes the whole face of the music industry. Until I said my generation comes along in 77 with punk rock. So although nobody really talks about Skiffle because it's really music they played when they were 40. I mean, you know, George Harrison was 13 when he saw Lonnie Donegan, you know. If you're Jimmy Page, there's a clip of Jimmy Page on YouTube, 14 years old, playing Mama Don't Allow No Skiffle Music Round Here on TV. But if you're Jimmy Page and you go to America in 1969 with Led Zeppelin, and Rolling Stone says, who inspired you to pick up the guitar, Jimmy? You're not going to say Chas McDavitt, are you? You're not going to say Lonnie Donegan. You're going to say Muddy Waters. Because, you know, you don't want to think about that stuff you were playing at school with your mates. So consequently, Skiffle kind of disappears from the story. But it is, I would argue, as powerful as punk rock and more important than punk rock. Because it's the original. There is no generation like that first generation of British school kids who became teenagers. That first generation of teenagers, they were the people who made the 1960s for us. There'll never be another generation like them, you know. They're like the pre-digital people, but even pre that, because they made their culture from absolutely nothing. They made their culture from songs they heard on the radio. They made their culture from rationing. They made their culture, they found African-American roots music that nobody else wanted to listen to, and they were inspired by that. I found an old guy lives in Brighton now, who was a skiffle kid, one of those kids, not in a famous band, but he's one of those kids who was playing in school halls. And I had a long chat with him, and he told me that the average skiffler felt they had more in common with an African-American sharecropper in Mississippi than they did with their own dad. Now, there ain't many music genres that have that effect on you. And that, brothers and sisters, siblings, kids, that is how skiffle changed the bleeding world. I'd like to welcome on some skifflers to sing a final song for you, get together and give you a bit of the old... If you're interested in a little bit more detail, I did write a book called Roots, Radicals and Rockers, How Skiffle Changed the World. It's available wherever you get your books from, which tells the story in a little bit more detail. And the great thing about Skiffle is it's a complete jam. So we're going to kind of jam a song for you. And not just any song either. We're going to jam a Lead Belly song that was probably Modern Rock Island Line. Modern Rock Island Line was the skiffler's song. Well, you might be familiar with it from the old days. And the great thing, that they used to have skiffle competitions in the 1950s, where loads of skiffle bands would play, and whoever got the most applause would go to a final in London. The Beatles were in one in Liverpool. They didn't progress me. But the thing was, because there was only so many skiffle songs, they would all play the same song over and over at different tempos, different speeds, out of tune, I mean, it must have been cacophonous. But so was punk rock, if you get what I mean. So this is Lead Belly's... Oh, they haven't started. Yeah, they kind of started then. Just on that, yeah. The Midnight Special. In F? In F. You might have to put a cape on that, mate, if you want to know. Wake up early in the morning when the ding dong rings. Go walking to the table, see the same old thing. Knock a fork upon the table. Ain't nothing in the pan. Say anything about it, get in trouble with the man. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine several loving light on me. Oh, let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine several loving light on me. But if you ever go to Houston, well, you better walk right. Well, you better not gamble. Oh, you better not fight, or the police will arrest you and they carry you down. And the next thing you know is you're penitentiary bound. With the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine silver loving light on me. Oh, let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine silver loving light on me. Oh, yonder come Miss Rosie, how in the hell you know? Well, I know about April and the dress she wore, umbrella on her shoulder, piece of paper in her hand. She's come to tell the governor, let loose my man. Well, the special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a silver loving light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine silver loving light on me.
Let the midnight special, yeah! Shine a light on me, come on! Let the midnight special shine silver looking light on me, everybody! Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. One more time! Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Come on! Let the midnight special shine silver light on me.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you all. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Billy Bragg, everybody. And they're right there behind him. And they're going to be on stage themselves in